All right, all right, all right. We're getting off to a little bit of a late start. Trying to work out some technical difficulties, but we're having a great discussion backstage that everybody's missing. So thankfully, we were able to go live now.
Sorry
So,
about that, dear viewers, especially Todd Doherty, who's been here, I think,
oh yeah,
since before the scheduled stream.
that's true.
Cheers.
That's we entitled our episode as our 80th episode. Thank you guys for being viewers. But we titled this episode as Mearsheimer's Barbaric Ideology. So of course that is a reference to John Mearsheimer. And everybody that's probably watching this program is familiar with John Mearsheimer. And we know him that he says some good things, that he's got some good takes on Israel, on Russia, and of course everything's relative. So his takes are good compared to the kind of takes that we get on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC. But very recently, John has just been, really a shooting star and becoming very, very popular. And so some of us, like myself, have been a little bit worried that there's some takes that John has that really are deserving of criticism. And our concern is that we want to make sure that people that embrace John and think that, wow, he's really speaking truth to power and he's really saying some solid, good things, that we understand that, there is a lot of room for criticism there. So having said that, I'm not the only one that has that opinion. So this morning, Garland Nixon, for instance, on his live stream just about an hour ago, also put out a pretty scathing video, criticizing Mearsheimer. Alex is our special guest today. So Alex, I didn't even introduce everybody. I'm sorry, guys, but our normal panel, Ben, Ian, and Carlo. And then we have our special guest is Alex. The last name was...
middle name is Fraser, Alexander Fraser. Actually, last name is, it'll be relevant as the show goes on, Kantrowitz.
Okay, I was going to call your last name Fraser, but I'm glad I didn't, because that's the middle name.
No.
So you did a rebuttal video to one of John Mearsheimer's recent lectures. And so I have put that in the comments section of this video, and I've also put an article I wrote a couple days ago, and I also put Garland Nixon's video criticizing John Mearsheimer. So what is the criticism? Like, what specifically? I'm going to try and cut to the chase,
Sure.
and then we can open it up after that. But essentially, Mearsheimer has his own theory of foreign policy. He calls it the realist theory. He says that his theory explains exactly how things work, and it's not a moral critique of the United States. It's his critiques of United States foreign policy come from a realist perspective, and within that realist perspective, it talks about power. Power is the dominant principle. And great powers need to, as a matter of course, just seek to maintain their power and go after their rivals. And any power that seeks to be a rival, they just need to go after. And that's just how the world works. And that's liberalism. So John promotes a liberalism. And this realist foreign policy critiques the U.S. because it says that, what we're doing with Russia is wrong. Not because, it's bad to kill, 1 million Ukrainians, or that we need to figure out ways to, get along and have good neighborliness with the entire planet. But it's wrong because it drove Russia into China's arms. And now China and Russia are united against us. And so what we should have done, says liberals like John Mearsheimer, is we should have done something else with Russia, maybe got them on our side, peeled them away from China so that we can go after China, because China is our peer competitor, and his liberal realist foreign policy ideology says we need to go after our peer competitors and make sure that they are contained and brought down before they usurp us. So it's a really immoral, and what it really doesn't do, it really does not explain how things are. It doesn't, because it ignores and denies the reality of oppositional class interests and how class interests are the prime influencing factor on U.S. foreign policy. It's all about class. It's all about making sure that the capitalist class, the ownership class, is in power, throughout the planet, and it's a comprador class that works with the Western imperialism to exploit the people. Anyway, so I've said a lot. I've probably said way too much. Everybody's probably confused by now.
I want to hear from Alex, but I want to say that I hate that when he goes on shows as a guest, everybody just accepts that he's the realist. He's like, the Brzezinski, who was also one of these nihilistic kind of psychopathology, grand chessboard kind of guys. I hate that it's just accepted without question. But I really want to hear from Alex.
Now,
thanks.
I was going to say, I don't want to derail it, but maybe we should, because I have not seen his Mearsheimer's latest video, so maybe an explanation of what his newest video said for those of us who haven't seen it.
As Billy Bob said, it's the pivot to China would have been more pragmatic on our resources, on our prestige, and it wouldn't have pushed.
And it wasn't just in his most recent video. This is kind of where he's been at. This is the place he comes from. It's his system. It's his system of understanding foreign policy, and then it's the advocacy that flows naturally from that system. But the system is just based on power. It's based on trying to be the hegemon, and then working violently if necessary to destroy any rivals to your hegemony. And that's it. Like, there's nothing, and that's not insightful, and it's not. It's not moral. It's just more. And so, Garland really took him to task, just calling him a neoliberal, his own kind of brand of neoliberalism. There's the pro-Israel neoliberalists, there's the anti-Russia neoliberalists, and then there's the anti-China neoliberalists. But sorry, Alex. Yeah, if you want to, I'm sure you have things you can add.
Yeah, thanks. I should start by saying, and if you look at my video, I think I mentioned, but apparently, and I just kind of figured this out from talking to a fellow kind of my age who worked as an engineer in where was it, Oklahoma City last year. And his father-in-law was basically a Polish emigre and a hitman for the CIA. And that got me thinking, my father tried to soft recruit me to first, I think it was maybe corporate espionage. I kind of remember that at the end of my college career. And, this was when the Soviet Union had just been detonated. And, he was always anti-Soviet. My beloved cousin Hal, cute old guy. He was pro-Soviet, pro-communist. Father, said he was a dupe and couldn't stand, the Soviet Union. Well, but so, he, not only that background, but then he tried to soft recruit me, and I'm like, well, why would I want to put myself at risk and spy for some capitalist? I'm a Marxist, a commune, or I guess I would have called myself a revolutionary socialist or something, but a Marxist. And I don't want to work for a capitalist and help them. My plan was actually before the Soviet Union was destroyed, I graduated in 92, but in 91, on my 23rd birthday, around that time, that's when the hardliner coup failed. And, right before then, I was planning, okay, let me go back to the Soviet Union, try to find my lost family who had survived the genocide there during World War II. And, maybe I'll join the KGB. The services there, and kill imperialists for killing my people. But anyway, so I get back and everything is, detonated, destroyed. There's no more purpose in life. It's horrible, and what? So, so my father tries to soft recruit me to corporate, espionage. Well, not interested. Oh, okay. Well, how about I made a list here of the options, if I can find it. But it was basically corporate espionage. Then, I also, I should mention, I did a internship with this company, Japanese securities company. That was kind of my focus, Japanese and economics. I ended up living in Japan and studying it and speaking it and all that stuff. And very good at it. But so they sent me on an errand to Bear Stearns, and I remember them mentioning offhand, "Oh, Jeffrey Epstein works there," and I was like, "Oh, really? Okay." And then all of a sudden, I got a call or something, or told, "Oh no, don't go there." So I turned around and went back to the securities company. Then that was followed by an offer to work for the AFL's foreign department. Basically the Department of Labor coups. And I was like, well, no. I met with, I think it was Jared Ballinger. He was the CIA guy in like Indonesia or something. And he later became a dissident, I believe. But I was just looking at him like a cockroach, like, gee, I wish I could just shoot you right now. Or, no, he could tell I was not interested. And then there was an offer to work, I think, for the NED, or he mentioned that. And I was like, and what do they do? Who are they funded by? I'll get back to you. No. And then finally it was the Ford Foundation. And I went to that interview and on my lunch break, and the woman just came out. She sat there and she was the big mucky muck, but she didn't introduce herself. And when I said to the secretary, look, I've got to go back to work, she just walked away. It was like, oh, we don't need you. And, whatever. So, but in terms of what else? My father, well, I guess you probably want to know more about, like my father also, I should say, was a fan of Edmund Burke intellectually. He was also, I've been told, my mother told me, my father, Nathan Kantrowitz, he was the founder of modern demography. And he worked for New York City for about 15 years before he retired. Before that, it was Kent State University, taught sociology, dabbled in criminology, etc. But one of the texts he taught was Edmund Burke. Like what if the British Empire could have come to an agreement with the American revolutionaries, that reactionary. And, I guess that gets to the counter-revolutionary nature of liberalism, right? That my father was basically, he was a reluctant liberal. He was I would call my parents super liberals, so super liberal that they were really, would-be social democrats. But the rest of the country was just so backward and right wing that they couldn't even be proper social democrats, right? So,
wait, can you fill in a couple of gaps, because we have
sure.
two guests. I mean, one guest and one guy. You are both in Russia right now. I think you're in Leningrad, also known as St. Petersburg, whereas Ian's in Moscow. So you have this dual background, which is Soviet and American. I think everybody here would think you're an American based on your accent, but it's not.
I am, yeah. I'm American Soviet.
An American Soviet. That's the intriguing part, and I wonder if you can just distill that down, because that's where your father and your later career and all that comes in.
Okay. So in terms of personal background, then, I don't want to bore people, but I guess it is interesting. Sure. So the American side is, I would say, maybe more my mother's side. They've been in Quebec, then Michigan. Some of my ancestors founded the state of Michigan. We probably have a few American Indians in the family, I guess. So, we've been in the Americas for at least 250 years, maybe some of them as long as 15,000 years on that side of the family. But my father's side, basically, they were, I joke, but they were basically the Jewish Taliban of Central White Russia, right? So my last name is Kantrowitz, and that means, if you translate it into Islam, it's bin muezzin. The guy who does the call to prayer, that would have been my, whatever clan's, job. And then I had a great uncle who was Bloch HaKohen. His name was Hachmed, in fact, his Jewish name. His Polish name was Robert Bloch. And then I had relatives who were Katz, which means, a Hasid told me that means Levi, which are it's Bolshe Imam and Menshe Imam. So the big priest in the temple, and then the small priest in the temple. And then my grandmother's side was Gurvich, which means descended from the Rebbe, which was later on after the destruction of the temple. You had, Rebbes, rabbis. And we all lived next to the main temple in this town. And I gather we'd come down with the number one Polish pani, or aristocrats, from Lithuania 500 years ago. I was told by another Landsman who lives in Texas. He's half Litvak. But that they came down from Radziwiłłys, I believe it was, to Nieszwiz, which means not a swamp. And then at a certain point, we intermarried with the Radziwiłł aristocracy. This was common if you read Abraham Leon. He writes about this. So where this all gets relevant is in the modern period. We were almost neighbors with the Dzerzhinsky family, who you may have heard of, Felix Dzerzhinsky. He was the knight of the October Revolution, a comrade of Rosa Luxemburg, one of the old Bolsheviks. And I have a long lost cousin. She reconnected through family tree DNA, Megan. She's ironically, she's a retired stripper, but she looks very much like Felix Dzerzhinsky's mother. And so our people intermarried, right? Like Felix Dzerzhinsky was descended from Polish nobility. We were like the Jewish elites within the Jews. Then you had the Polish aristocracy, right, in the mix. Anyway, so what else then?
You already have like 15 roots, man.
Yeah. But just focusing on the Soviet side, which is fascinating enough. So my grandfather ended up going with his mother, Max Kantrowitz. His father, Mikhail Kantrowitz, had died of like heart failure or something, probably from all the manure in the streets and the lack of sanitation, thanks to the semi-feudal capitalists there. They go to America 1888. My grandmother follows 1912. She's basically a rich Jewish girl. Her father was a fur and leather wholesaler. And Felix Dzerzhinsky, meanwhile, he wanted to become a priest. He ended up becoming a Bolshevik revolutionary and went to prison for many years. Anyway, Felix, as you probably know, became the chair of the Cheka, which became the KGB.
Oh, this is Iron Felix. Yes.
Iron Felix. Yes. And so my father's character, our people's character, is very Belaruski, very, of that land, of those, Iron Felix is an archetypal Belaruski, Polish, he's part Jewish, I believe, part Polish nobility. He's a hardcore communist. So many of my family, most of them were hardcore communists, except for my grandparents and my father. And, I'll get into that later, maybe. It's interesting in terms of my father's development, I believe, as a CIA agent, OSS to CIA, and, liberalism in there, or social democratic orientation. But just in terms of that whole history, what ended up happening then, I'll just make a long story short. I don't want to bore everyone, but basically what happened was, in 1939, Mikhail Gurevich came. His family were rich Jews who actually lived in Moscow in a mansion, invited by the Tsar, 1886. That mansion became a kommunalka, communal housing. If you go up to Sretinsky Boulevard, up to Lukoil headquarters, Ulansky Pereulok, I believe it's number 13. You can see a mansion there. It's luxury housing. And just short of, I think, the First Ring Road, just right there at the border. But that was my cousin by marriage mansion. Mihimakomunalka. Anyway, he becomes a Red Army lieutenant, is sent to Nyeshwiz, liberated Soviet Western Belarus, meets my cute cousin Ita Altarovna, whatever her last name. There are 3 variations, but and what happened? So they got married, went back to Moscow, and he eventually became KGB, I believe. He was an electronics telecommunications developer in the Soviet Union, a technician. And, they were basically hardcore Soviet intelligence KGB people, from the land of, where Dzerzhinsky came from. And so, then in 1941, of course, the capitalists invaded, and the Nazis subcontracted to the fascists, and the fascists shot all of our people, like 80% of the town, October 30th. And then some of my relatives were murdered October 31st on Halloween, 1941. And what happened? So, so basically and unbeknownst to any of us, Ita sent a photograph of herself and her family, like in 1935 in Nyeshwiz, to my grandmother, and basically said, they are all dead. They were murdered, but I have survived. But because of the Cold War, because my uncle was OSS, and my father was probably, I'm almost sure, OSS, later on, I'm almost sure CIA, that was told to me by another relative who is, I'm almost positive, is, in the agency. I can't name this person for legal reasons, but I know this person very well. And so what happened? So my grandmother never told us. And then decades later, after everyone had died, I managed to track down the daughter and granddaughter and grandson, etc., of Ita, who had died in 2002. But 2019, I reunited with this family. And this family actually were KGB, now FSB. I probably shouldn't go into details there because of the war and all of,
I mean, I was hoping we could tie that into Mearsheimer and liberalism.
Sure.
Sorry.
Sure. No.
It's a really fascinating network and roots that you have in the former Soviet Union, and it's really interesting. But I'm curious, like how does that tie into the liberalism of Mearsheimer? And a lot of people that have just embraced liberalism, even unbeknownst to themselves, but that's the only way they know of thinking. They in their liberal view, they see liberalism as something specific. It's the liberals, like Democrats. Only Democrats are liberals. So that's I see that's kind of I deal with that on social media. Is like, why do you call John Mearsheimer a liberal? I'm like, well, I mean liberal in the sense of liberalism, like the founding ideology of the capitalist class. Maybe not the founding idea. Yeah, no, it is. It is the founding ideology of the capitalist class. Yeah. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead and maybe tie that in if you can.
Sure. So I guess on an intellectual level, and I should say both my parents, they went to University of Chicago, and as I've said before, they were super liberals. My parents, they led a rent strike against these racist real estate companies in Hyde Park. They worked with Ab Mikva, Bill Clinton's lawyer, later on, but this was back in like 1960. They got thrown out of their housing, but basically they were rent striking so that middle-class black families could move into Hyde Park. That was the period when they were moving in, and the rental companies were trying to exclude these families. So, just to show, their liberal bona fides, I guess. And, my mother was, I'll skip a little bit. they ended up teaching at Kent State University right after the shootings there, 1970. And they went in the fall. My mother was a founding member of the second wave of the feminist movement. She sued Kent State University. She wrote articles for books, on feminists talking about gender discrimination, et cetera. And it was a real militant, in a sense, or severe, harsh struggle. I mean, it destroyed the family in the end, I would say, because she was cheated out of any settlement. But anyway, so at the same time, so it shows you kind of what I guess, the Soviets at one time might have called social fascism, right? That, they were extreme super liberals, almost they would have been social democrats. They had utter contempt for reactionaries in America. They came from a Bund Menshevik socialist background. My grandparents used to pray to God every night that Norman Thomas would be elected president of the United States of America. And Norman Thomas, is to the left of Bernie Sanders. And they ended up, members of my family ended up being huge Bernie supporters too. But at the same time, you saw then the kind of, fatal attraction, the mask came off after 1992, when, another close relative went in to teach English in Poland first, then ended up in Kyrgyzstan and around the world, supposedly teaching English in the Peace Corps and then for contracting agencies. And then he also was with Richard Holbrooke in Kosovo in 1999. Bragging, at dinner with my father. Oh, I drove Richard Holbrooke around with a briefcase full of cash, basically, I guess, to bribe all of these cockroaches, who were willing to sell out Yugoslavia, because, it's Serbia. And, I said to this person, oh, you missed your chance. You should have put your seatbelt on. You should have, revved the Jeep up to 70 miles an hour and then ditched it and killed him and performed a service to humanity. And, this person and my father just looked at each other in horror, and then, but basically, very, after 92, it was a very kind of, CIA liberal Clintonite, this relative worked under Clinton, for the most part, very snide, very, I am the master of the universe. You are just a dirty deplorable. It's all Stalin's fault that Kyrgyzstan is a mess now, etc. And, that, and we have the right to do as we please. And then later on, however, the last time I saw this person, maybe 5 years ago, they or 6, they admitted to me, oh, well, in reflection, it's just all about the money. These are just state bureaucracies. And, this person, with, intelligence was basically, he was a huge Bernie supporter, campaigned, donated, many hours. And, as was my mother. But, at the same time, my mother was like, oh, I don't think, why should those other countries determine their own destiny? It's like idiotic stuff. Like, you'd be like, okay, well, why do you think that? And she couldn't explain it even, I don't think. It was just a sort of, liberal colonialist Anglophile sort of mindset. Given, I grew up around Westchester Peace and Action Coalition. I go to their picnics and with my parents, and Pete Seeger would be there, and the consul of Vietnam would be there. My parents were against the Vietnam War. They kind of admired Castro, and they kind of supported the Cuban Revolution. Although the Gusanos around us in our town, Tarrytown, New York, they couldn't. They were like, oh, we can't talk about it. The Gusanos will go fucking crazy. But so it's just a total mind fuck. Like after 1992, to then have a close relative be doing all the skullduggery against post-Soviet states But I guess the idea was, and relevant to Mearsheimer's way of thinking, is, well, we're entitled, right? We, as Albright said, we are the indispensable nation. The price is worth it, right? So therefore, it's all Stalin's fault. We're going to blame, Stalin didn't get me a pony. That's the Shachtmanite take, I guess. I hate Stalin. It all ended badly. Therefore, it's all his fault. And now I'm going to, if I'm Russian or Eastern European, now I'm going to go work for an NGO in the CIA. Or, in my family's case, oh, yeah, now I'm going to work for, this intelligence. And, it's twisted, but, that's kind of the twisted thought pattern. But it's very disorienting because, and I'm sure for people nowadays too, when they look at a Mearsheimer or, many other critics of, what's the word, like just, issue by issue, right? If they're only looking at it issue by issue, these things in isolation, and they're not looking at it systematically, right?
No.
Then, then they devolve into, oh, well, Stalin was a bad man. Well, I came up as first a kind of a, left Buntist, then I don't know what you call me, like basically I'd say Bolshevik Leninist, Trotskyist background, Orthodox Trotskyist background. So I'm not a huge fan of, Joseph Stalin. But on the other hand, like James Buchanan said, don't be a Stalinophobe, recognize, the progressive nature of the Soviet Union and the Red Army historically, and, recognize the point at history that we're at and be able to systematically connect things, right? That, human rights, it's not that, okay, I'm going to be for human rights, therefore I'm against Russia. Or I would, historically I'm against the Soviet Union and all that happened there. So yeah, but there's another part of this too, but maybe I'll just stop there if you want to.
I was gonna say, if we're contrasting socialism, Marxism with liberalism, definitely one of the defining features of liberalism is to see everything in a vacuum, to detach, to silo everything, silo economics from politics, two entirely distinct fields. You have politics, then you have economics. That's liberal. That's the liberal approach.
Right.
Socialism, Marxism understands and appreciates the interrelatedness of everything, and it understands that you can't truly understand somebody without understanding its relationship with everything else. And so it's just like liberalism is a fake, false ideology, and it's really a cover. It's a cover for blatant, wealthy, the rule of the wealthy elite, the dictatorship of the capitalist class, the dictatorship of the ownership class. And liberalism is their ideology that they promote. And the more they can promote and proliferate this liberalism, the more they entrench themselves into power, and the harder it is to, overthrow that power. But there's so many things I want to get to. But did you want to follow up? Do you have something?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say too, like in terms of the micro personal, right? Sometime after '92, I'm sitting in Chicago. There's a dinner party my parents throw with these other liberals in the building, the Edgewater Beach Apartments. That's a whole story in and of itself. And then, I start to make some criticisms, historical or contemporary, international political economic from basically a Marxist standpoint, maybe, I don't know, it was many years ago. And my mother, just like freezes up or just starts to, loudly try to change the conversation. And, she was also the queen of denial, right? And also kind of destructive when she didn't, I didn't take the path in life she wanted, right? So she became kind of destructive in a number of ways. But that also points to, it's not only the bourgeoisie, right? But it's also the petit bourgeoisie, the Karens, the Chads, the yuppies or whatever of my parents' generation, whatever, you call them, but they, were petit bourgeois, upper petit bourgeois, and they come from very rough proletarian or plebeian backgrounds. My father started smoking when he was 10 years old, right? And he never had a real childhood. And he went off to World War II to die, to get away from his mother, who was just, an awful Oriental rug merchant. And my mother was an orphan, right? But they had achieved this material comfort. And the people around them in the Edgewater Beach apartments, mostly these Irish establishment types, like George Hollis, I think his name was, the owner of the Bears, had lived in that building at one point. These were very materially comfortable people. And like Europe in the interwar period, they wanted to keep those privileges. They were the petit bourgeoisie that basically in the end would have backed a Pinochet, right? Or a Hitler, or Scheidem in the Freikorps, in 1919 that murdered Rosa Luxemburg, Felix Dzerzhinsky's comrade, right? Rosa, who fainted when she heard that Felix was appointed the chair of the Cheka, I read, So, but the historical ironies, but basically, so the liberalism for me is, absolutely repugnant. Although it has that material pull, if you do not have a mass communist movement based in a mass, working class vanguard and then a massive working class, like you read A.Y. Badayev's, what was the book? Bolsheviks in the Tsarist Duma. He was in the Duma here in Petrograd, or St. Petersburg called at the time. And you see in Russia, incredible difference. Dostoevsky begging the youth of St. Petersburg to not burn down the rest, to stop at half the town. Don't burn down all of St. Petersburg. 17,000 Tsarist officials, probably mostly police, shot, in the run-up to the October Revolution. The repressions here, etc., is extraordinarily energetic, dynamic, bloody, and violent here. That we don't have in the West, historically so much, apart from like after the Civil War, perhaps, or somewhat in the 1930s in the U.S. But it pales in comparison to what happened here. And it's even capitalist Russia is better for it now. In the Tucker Carlson CIA petit bourgeois view of things, it's a functioning society. The grocery prices are half, even adjusted for PP purchasing power parity, they're half what they are in the land of buy one, get one free. The housing prices are about half. Something like that.
This is delightfully different than what I anticipated. I'm glad you brought in Tucker, because he was almost recruited by Daddy, who worked for the Voice of America. So it's a similar path, in life. What gripped me about your monologue of one of your family members out of the 1 million, I don't know which, who came back years later and said it was all about the money. Now, if I had a time machine, I wouldn't go back. I'd go forward 10 years and ask the Georgians, why'd you do this? Because right now it's all about freedom, this nice, cozy lifestyle that I can have my lattes in the European clubs and cafes. But I wonder in 10 years from now, they'll just say, yeah, fuck, it doesn't look good, but it was all about the money for us. I wonder. And that's what strikes me about liberalism. It's vapid. First, they say we have the, I heard this from Alex McKay that, Orban Viktor, my prime minister, that he has his principles, and if you don't like them, he has others. And that's sort of the vapidness of liberalism. It looks like it's principled. It's all about individual and human rights. Right now, Ibrahim Raisi died, and all of the headlines were about the butcher of Tehran. He cracked down on the protesters, women's rights. Everything was about that. It was very, very disgraceful. Not about the loss of, the president of an important country. But this vapidness falls apart as soon as you no longer have your comfortable lifestyle. As soon as you're proletarianized again. Oh shit! That all goes away. That's what struck me most from your comments. But I'm sure others have other thoughts.
I had one more quick thought, and I wanted to get Carlo or Ian in. My quick thought was just, back to Mearsheimer and how, liberalism is, again, it's the ideology of the elites. and it's the ideology that they promote. And so really what Mearsheimer is doing, he's looking out, and in a realist fashion, he's thinking to himself, how can the elites within the United States maintain their power? And then he projects that same outlook, that same liberal barbarism, he projects that onto China. And he says, China's got to be the same way. They've got to be stupid fucking liberals, just like us. And he can't think outside of that box that, no, China is interested in progressing humanity. They don't give a fuck about fucking, a rich elite and what can we do to make sure the rich elite maintains their power to exploit the masses. That's liberalism. That's not fucking China. And so that's not, and so that relegates his entire system, his entire framework to totally detach from actual reality. So to call his framework realist is bullshit. It's fucking bullshit because it's totally detached from actual realism. But that was my main point. Read my article at the Greanville Post. It kind of goes into that, and also watch Alex's rebuttal video too, because Alex gets into history about because Mearsheimer, he's just an ignorant liberal. He buys the liberal history. He says Stalin killed more people than Hitler did. That kind of liberal nonsense. So Alex,
which comes. I'm ashamed of this, but comes mostly from Poland. This whole story of the Nazis and the Soviets were equally bad. They're two sides of the same coin. That mostly came from Poland. Unfortunately, they used their archives as a weapon against modern Russia and against the Soviet Union. And it's only the last 10 years, especially the last two, that Vladimir Putin and Russia have begun to use the Soviet archives correctly, to correct the record on Katyn, which they fucking apologized for when it wasn't them. I'm just going to say the roots of this shit are in Eastern Europe, and that's a damn shame. Sorry. Yeah, I do.
Carlo and Ian, we're so sorry to monopolize.
No. Ian, you have anything to share?
Sure. So it's I wouldn't just say when you're talking about this pragmatic realism, what Mearsheimer advocates for and apologizes for. I mean, I wouldn't say it's just liberals. I would say it's across the spectrum. It's a problem with American politics. Everything has to be this kind of Machiavellianism. We love, or at least our interpretation of Machiavellianism, that the ends justify the means, and no one looks at war, whether it's the invasion of Iraq or supporting Ukraine against Donbass and Russia. No one asks, is this the morally correct choice? No one. I mean, it's not. We don't have an answer to that question because we don't ask the question to begin with. It's always, is this the best? Is this a plan that's going to work? Is this going to benefit us the most? That's how we frame everything. And
I like
the longer you're amoral, you become more. What happens is you're continuing to make decisions based on that. With each progressive decision, you're straying further away from any kind of moral baseline. The more you do that. So even at this place, you have like Marjorie Greene, and you have these few naysayers in our Congress who oppose, say, more money to Ukraine, but they don't base their arguments on any kind of morality. So it just doesn't hold much water, because it's true. $60 billion is not a lot of money. It's true.
Well,
it's a drop
in the grand scheme of America's budget, you mean?
Yes,
it's a lot of money for me.
It's a lot of money for Ukraine too, but it's not a lot of money. So the pragmatic arguments against aid for Ukraine don't hold very much water. So it's why it doesn't convince anyone, because it's not based on morality, and their audiences aren't even used to hearing arguments based on morality. So even if some naysayer did try to base his arguments on morality, people wouldn't understand it, because we've never even considered it. Like Tucker Carlson, he never said, "Oh, it's morally." I don't think those words have ever. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think those words have ever even left Tucker Carlson's
mouth. A lot of
mouth.
people just accept the liberal tautology that you can't have morality in political affairs. That morality has no place, and that's what John Mearsheimer preaches. You have to take morality out of it. You look at it as a power, a discussion of power principles. And the Cold War planner too said the same thing. in his
Brzezinski,
long
Mika's
telegram.
daddy, exactly.
Well,
the
the
same.
one before Brzezinski, the long telegram.
Kennan?
George Kennan.
Oh, George Kennan
Said, hey, we need to forget about altruism, forget about trying to be our brother's keeper, forget about trying to make other people like us. We have to deal in straight power politics, economic warfare, violence, political assassination. I mean, that's what George Kennan was preaching in 1949, and that's exactly the policies that we adopted. But again, that's liberalism, and so we shouldn't accept that, right? We should offer something better. Hey, what's in the best interest, not of this nation state, not of the ruling class that rules this nation state? What's in the best interest of humanity? You know, is it going to be competition and conflict, or is it going to be cooperation and multipolarism? So, I mean, these are basic things that liberalism rejects, because ultimately liberalism is only concerned in perpetuating the rule of the wealthy elite. That's it.
I'd like to, either confuse or clarify just one small point, because you talked about the liberalism, the founding ideology of the capitalist class since 3 centuries ago, but you also mixed in neoliberalism, and I'd just like to make a difference there. They both fit Mearsheimer, unfortunately.
Us, Ben. Go ahead and confuse everyone.
Neoliberalism is an economic policy of everything should be privatized, privately owned, unregulated. The markets will sort themselves out based on greed. So some of the worst behavior in human history will lead to the best results for everybody. That's neoliberalism. It's not on the political spectrum. For example, George Bush and Bill Clinton, while politically somewhat different, economically they espoused exactly the same. Never mind the slogans of economically, that is the mantra in the West, and that's why they project what they do onto China, onto Russia. Russia is an expansionist colonial force, or an imperialist now they call it, and China does the same. The debt trap diplomacy that no one's ever fallen into in Africa, and they're in like 40-something countries in Africa. It's projection of what they do in the world. I just wanted to either confuse or clarify that one.
George Kennan, NSE 68. But when you talk about Mearsheimer, I just don't get it. I don't get it, because what happens with an ethical stance is you do something. China is doing wonderful things for its own people and for the world. That's what comes. Then comes the ethics. Then you go, well, there must be something ethical about what they're doing if they're feeding more people, if they're enabling people to get their products to market, if they're able to visit their relatives on a high-speed train. That ethics grows out of what you do. And if he can't see that, I don't know what's wrong with him.
Alex, I'm keen for you to answer, but sorry, you didn't finish, Carlo? Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I've stated before, they attempted to recruit me into the Voice of America, and essentially CIA, on the strength of the fact that I was doing study. I had studied, did a year's worth of independent study on the poet Ezra Pound, because John Pauker, Reed Whittemore, and more importantly, James Angleton had published Pound and admired Pound's poetry. They had published Pound when they were together at Yale in a magazine called Furioso. So, living in Washington, I caught the attention of John Pauker's salon, which was inhabited by Reed Whittemore, James Angleton, and a bunch of other people, Paul Lawson, Bill Clare, Voice of America people. And I had the same sense about it that Alex did. I said, no, I don't want this. I don't want to be around this. And
we're happy you turned them down.
Interesting.
But you might be worth more if you didn't.
Yeah, thanks.
Back to, and Alex, you can respond freely after this. I think this will help me. Back to neoliberalism/liberalism and its weird relationship with ethics. Check this out. I think this is a very telling short 23-second video presented by Li Jingjing. I think she works for CGT and she's fantastic. Just check this out.
We can't hear anything. No, we can't hear anything.
Are you telling me I didn't do video? I didn't do audio sharing again? I'm sorry, but I will.
Well, we were able to read it, but yeah, let's do it with the
Yeah,
audio.
you can read.
I'm sorry. There is audio. I will repeat this.
You could
and-
hear it, and we could.
Yeah, sorry. I have to click that thing.
This is how the U.S. politicians feel about the Belt and Road Initiative, and you'd be surprised at
amazing.
the answer.
Unfortunately, BRI is an ambitious and hopeful project that speaks to the aspirations of China's plans and potential. I hate it because it's a great idea, because it inspires folks in the global south.
Those fucks.
I hate it because it inspires people in the global south. It's just not our idea.
Only
I've never heard
liberals
that.
think like that. Like that's a
Mhm.
liberal. That's ridiculous. It's good, and they're our enemies, so we got to destroy them because they're smart and helping people. It's awful. It's fuck.
Yeah. I think I guess I would agree with what's his name, Alexander McKay. Yeah, that I think China. I haven't done an in-depth study of it. I don't know if I have the resources to do it. I guess maybe I could, follow what Alexander McKay is doing more closely. But I tend to think, and friends over here on the left in Russia that I knew in Moscow were saying, well, basically the Chinese leadership as a whole, not all of them, but as a whole, are are Dengists, or they would classify it as in Dengism is better than Yeltsinism. The Chinese have better morale, obviously better organization. Their economic reach is far superior to Russia or the former Soviet Union. So I would say, I guess in general, like my hope as a communist would be that the Chinese working class, and perhaps even the Indian working class, or et cetera, at some point get organized in real Soviets, and or rejuvenate the Chinese party. I guess from what Alexander is saying, there are revolutionary. There's a layer.
A huge wing. It's 95 million people. A huge wing of it is revolutionary. There are liberals in there as well. Absolutely.
Right.
So
yeah. So, in terms of my own relative, I mean, this relative was involved with heating technology, green technology, and advocating green capitalism. And he'd go to India, Japan, Korea, China briefly, I think. Where else? The Americas, etc. And he'd work with technicians or contractors, etc. But he'd also talk about like micro loans and that sort of nonsense. So I think in a way it's a dispute. Like the Western liberals are onto this BS about, oh, we're going to do everything, small is beautiful, E.F. Schumacher. We don't want to give the peasants literally too much, basically keep them basically down, but busy, I guess. And like I see here in the former Soviet Union too, the liberals here in the former Soviet Union, the ideal was, oh, I'm going to open a coffee shop, or I'm going to be some sort of symbolic analyst, master of the universe, as I think Robert Reich put it back in 92, 93. So, it's more an individualist sort of approach, whereas I think the Chinese, they're clever people with delicious food, and more importantly, they had a more recent revolution. They're more collectivist. Maybe their history is more collectivist. I know the Japanese are very collectivist. I don't know compared to the Russians, but certainly in the more recent last 30 to 50 years, the Chinese have been more collectively oriented, more organized, better morale. Anyway, so and so I think it's a difference. They're both overall, approaching with a capitalist approach. It's just that the Chinese are much, much smarter and now more dynamic, and they're in the upswing doing this. And I had some points also about the national liberation struggle going back, if I shift focus back like 80 years, and how this relates to Brzezinski and Mearsheimer and the Zionists as well, the Holocaust industry, anti-Soviet, anti-Stalin, kind of propaganda, all of that history of what they called the Kresy or Ukraine, the borderlands historically. These were the Bolsheviks saw them. They were shocked when, after the revolution or around the time, they went in and they tried to organize the peasants, and they were shocked at the barbarism of these lands. And there was it was like a Breaking Bad there. It sounded. I was reading one book, and lots of smuggling. They were stoning to death apostates who would leave Judaism in hellholes in the Ukrainian Kresy into the 1930s. But overall, the Polish pani were sitting on top of all of this. The Tsarist authorities had given them autonomy. So it was like that was your national cultural autonomy, as opposed to national self-determination, which was what Lenin and the Bolsheviks pushed. Well, in that context, the Polish aristocracy kept that whole region, Ukraine, after the revolution, even especially we're talking about like 1919, 1920 until 1939, the liberation, Western Ukraine, Western Belarus. That whole region, it was backward, underdeveloped. 40% probably of the White Russian peasants starved for 20 plus years. They ate potato peel soup every night because they did not have a land allotment that was big enough or fertile enough to sustain them. At least in Belarus, I think this was true, and even more so as you went north to Lithuania. And my cousin in Moscow, she said her grandmother, the wife of the KGB agent Mikhail, said to her, when we lived in Yeshwiz, the Polish occupiers, like West Bank settlers, referred to our people, or the White Russian people, as Belaruski people, as Hum, as the subhumans, those cursed with the stain of Ham. And if you were a Belaruski and a Pole walked down the sidewalk, you had to get off the sidewalk and walk in the gutter, right? And if a Pole was being waited on by a Jew in a shop, the Belaruski had to stay outside of the shop, right? And then what else? The Jews were also starving. The Bund was not allowed to take its seat that it won in elections. Never mind if you're a communist, many of whom were Jews, but there were Polish communists, etc. as well. They would be put in a concentration camp, in Belarus by the Polish occupying authorities. So this went on for 20 years. And in the meantime, in 1936 in Snov, our family's other town, my cousin, Aharon, I forget his last name, but it was Blashinsky, I believe, in Belarus. His forebear fled Belarus because what happened was the Soviets sent special commando units over the border in 1936 into Snov, which means dreams, and they arrested in the middle of the night whole Polish occupier families, including the children, and they marched them out to the forest here in Snov, and they shot them into pits, everyone. And I was told this by one of the workers in the town there back in I don't know when it was, 17 perhaps, and later she denied it. It's not politically correct to speak of this anymore, but basically, so it was like Algeria, right? It was, or Vietnam. We are very similar to Vietnam historically. Swampy, the Mongols weren't able to invade and colonize us, either us or Vietnam. History of guerrilla resistance, etc. But basically, it was a brutal national liberation struggle. And when we were liberated, the week before the Red Army came in, September 17th, 1939, the liberation, the peasants would catch the occupying officers and they would beat them within an inch of their life sometimes, and then bury them alive, right? Or do them in with pitchforks or shovels. So it was, I tend to be of the opinion, looking at whatever evidence I could, and my roommate, who's a doctor and a communist here too, agrees that basically it was us, because we had certainly the motivation. Basically, we were genocided, the Jews were, and what was it? What percent of non-Jewish Belaruskis were murdered? It was 1.5 million, perhaps, out of 9.5, 10 million, and 800,000 Jews were murdered. 80% of my town was murdered, and so basically, I think our people did arrest the Polish occupiers, like the Palestinians would like to, or like the Algerians used to bomb the Pied Noir in Algeria. And, they brutally, actually, I think shooting these guys in the back of the head was, relatively civilized compared to what the fascists later did, especially like in places like Lithuania or Lvov. So I think, though, it was, and that gets to, right, that during the liberation, the majority of the people's militias, right, that worked with the NKVD at this time were Jewish, and like 2/3 in my town, right? And that was a low number. Our town was more counter-revolutionary, but they would execute bad capitalists. They would either execute or deport to Siberia collaborators. Like if you were a cop for the Polish occupation, what was it? Daughter of the man my great-grandfather started in the bootmaking business, had a little boyfriend. She was like 7 years old at the time of the or 12, I think, actually, at the time of the liberation. And her little boyfriend, Pavel, in school, his father was a cop for the Polish occupation. And our people, mostly the Jews, as well as the peasants in the people's militias, arrested him and his whole family, and they put them on a wagon to the freight car to Siberia. And little Pavel caught typhus from a flea on the freight car to Siberia, and he died, right? And after that, little Elena, I think her name was, she hated the communists, the Jews, but also the Nazis. Like her uncle became a partisan and fought the Nazis, and they hated the Nazis more, but they also hated not Polish occupation. They hated the communists and the Jews. And she was quite gleeful, pretty much, when she recounted the story of my great uncle Rachmiel Bloch. When he was October 31st, 1941, he was thrown on the back of a wagon by the fascists with his two great nephews, who were like 5 and 7, and they were murdered in the town quarry. For her, this was like a revenge against these red Jews who had backed, in the majority, had backed the Soviets, as she looked at it, occupation. So it was very complicated and bloody and brutal. And of course, in the end, but that relates to liberalism, because the liberals.
How?
I'll tell you, because it's leading to the ideology that dominates in Europe today, where they say that the Soviet Union and the fascists, they're both two sides of the same fascist coin. Soviet
Right.
Union, communism, and Nazism. Liberalism defeated them in World War II. Or,
Right.
well, they defeated the fascism of the Nazis, and then the Cold War defeated the fascism of the Soviets. And
Right.
so,
Well, that'd be
so
us.
he's
Yeah.
describing the foundational underpinnings of
Right.
the liberalism that they're trying to sell to us in the West, equating communism with Nazism. I mean, I get that. It took a little while to get there, Alex, but
Yeah, it sounded like a whole lot of, Nestor Makhno and his green opportunist robbing assholes to me, and nothing like the Red Army that I know about. But okay, I mean, I understand there's a background there. There's one comment from Spanish Fats who we know, and her parents are from the Brest region. I'm pretty sure not heroes of the Brest Fortress, because not many came out alive.
Right.
By the way, hats off to them. The first sacrifice, in Operation Barbarossa, but she doesn't know of any kind of sort of.
Oh, yeah, no, it was very violent. It was basically.
Yeah, but even you mentioned one of the eyewitnesses said this horrible thing happened, and then he redacted it because it's politically incorrect to say so. That sounds like a lot of Hungarian grandma stories where the Red Army came to rape and kill anyone, and then they said nothing about it because those stories were meant to be, the westernized. I understand the spiel, but if we can get back to liberalism, I'll be happy.
Yeah. So how this connects to liberalism, I think that my view is, even with the crimes of our side, which, I believe there were, and yeah, there are lies, of course, like the liberals lie, the Soviet bureaucrats lied less. They lied. And, but the thing is that, in the end, I actually went to Katyn after I reunited with my family to toast the deaths of those Assadnik oppressors. And I asked one of the Totyas there, the docent, what about the innocent people? Relatively innocent people who were shot here by the, like I would say, tongue in cheek, by the Devil Reds. And she said, well,
that's not true, though.
Yeah, well, I think
they were shot by the Nazis. That is now perfectly clear by the Soviet archives, even though for a while Putin's people apologized for it because they accepted the Polish version of history, which is not true. But
be that as it may, what this aunt said was, in war, it is better to kill the innocent than to let the guilty go free. That was their approach because it was brutal. You have to look at the historical material reality of this region, especially the Baltics or Ukraine, Western Ukraine. I mean, they were murdering people with the fascists with farming implements. But it wasn't only the fascists. But as a famous revolutionary, which most people here won't appreciate, but this revolutionary said, well, the ends do justify the means, but they also condition the means. And what that means in practical reality is that our side killed far fewer, in fact, fewer collaborators than I would prefer, because you had Poles trading. I had a Polish comrade in Minsk, hardcore Polish communists say to me, yeah, the Poles were trading Jews to the Gestapo during the war for bags of flour, right? And this is the history that, the human rights bullshit, right? Judging what it drives me crazy. The human rights bullshit, right? I'm sorry, if I can just, I'll stop after this. The human rights bullshit of, those red devils were so terrible and mean and violent. Well, no shit. It's like you're living in a place where, my grandfather dies at the age of 24 from a heart attack or whatever, from the shit in the street piled up so high that it's tromped into his house. The life expectancy of the peasantry before the revolution was 30 years old. It was absolutely brutal. And, Jewish women were getting raped by Polish nationalists. My cousin was subject to those threats. In the end, she was shot into a pit, but she had to travel from Warsaw to Nieshwiz, probably had a knife on her to protect against being
That's,
raped.
that's the point I was going to make, Alex, was just, to try and think that, from my comfortable liberal existence in suburbia, I can make moral judgments about, facts that we're not even
neither of us
certain
lived at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So Katyn, I know there's, a divergence of views on the Katyn massacre, and like, it's a tough one. Like, I don't have certainty either way. Ben seems to have certainty. Maybe he knows something I don't. But it could go either way. I would like to think that the communists obviously were engaged with more of my suburban morality, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But it was definitely a real tumultuous context, and until you appreciate that context, kind of like you've been describing this whole time, you can't even begin to even think that you can pass moral judgment.
I mean, the Vietnamese, the what is it? The insurgents in the South, they would execute village headmen for
revolution, it's violent, and I mean that's the nature of war. And to think that atrocities won't be committed, reprisals and such, like that's not, you're not engaging in war. You're not fighting to win if you're not fighting. War is an unending series of atrocities. That's what war is.
Yeah,
I mean, we're going to talk about the ICC, maybe. I'm not sure. I know the International Criminal Court has recently indicted, much to the delight of liberals, some liberals, Netanyahu and his band of genociders. I wanted to make a point about that. I would just say that what I kind of see taking place with that is, there's this divide within the ruling establishment, and you have the liberal ruling establishment, and then you have the more conservative. And when I say liberal, I mean more, the Democrat-friendly, anti-Trump wing of the ruling establishment. And then you have the Trump wing of the ruling establishment, which is a minority and not nearly as powerful. And Netanyahu is kind of on the same side as this Trump faction of the Western ruling establishment. And the liberal wing is marshaling its forces and its resources to blame Netanyahu, to scapegoat Netanyahu, and to get Netanyahu out of there, not for the benefit of morality, not to benefit the Palestinians, not to bring justice, but to better perpetuate the ongoing injustice. And so that's what I see when I watch these weirdos at the ICC, the International Caucasian Court. They are simply a tool of Western imperialism, the liberal wing, the Transatlantic Alliance wing, that Trump and his nationalists oppose, and at least give lip service against. It's this wing that is against Trump and against Netanyahu, and this is definitely a resource. This is an arm of that wing of liberal imperialism that is going after Netanyahu. If you want to play that real quick, Ben, we can get like a 20-second clip, or do you want to say something?
Yeah, we don't want to play the whole thing because Mr. Karim Khan is
but look at these weirdos. Like, these people aren't about justice. They're not here to bring justice and but go ahead.
I like their facial expression because it's
ridiculous
to actually do
what
this.
The fuck?
Let's go.
I can also confirm today.
Sorry, that's the max volume.
That I have reasonable grounds to believe, on the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant.
I mean, that's theater. That's theater. That's political theater. Look at those clowns in the back with their silly, smug face. Like, come on. So, I mean, it's nice. Great. Everybody wants to see Netanyahu go. He's a genocide, racist, apartheid, supporter. But what they're going to put in his place is not going to be any better, and it's going to enable them to better maintain their Zionist project. I mean, that's my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
I'll add a quick observation to that. Yeah, the liberal agenda here is to restore like the peaceful, nice, we have these what do you call those beautiful lefty compounds you have in Israel? I'm blanking on the word. But yeah, they're going to get rid of bad Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, these maniacs, and they're going to put some liberal-looking guy in there, and everything will be back to normal, to usual. And they think that image of Israel of the safe haven and the most moral army of the world will be restored. They are patently mistaken, but that is, I think, at this moment what they think will happen.
I remember we had Scott Ritter on the show, and I was a little dismayed when he started talking. This was a while ago, and he started talking about Israel and Palestine, and he was really blaming Netanyahu. he was saying Netanyahu, he's the whole problem, and that's liberal nonsense. Zionism is the problem. Netanyahu is just a figurehead, and if you remove him, and that's what So Scott's whole thing, and he's recanted a little bit. I've seen him in his interviews recanting, but he was all about Netanyahu was the bad guy. The good guy was the guy that was assassinated, Rabin. But Rabin was a fucking terrorist. He was in the Stern gang or Leahy, one of those. And no, that was poor analysis on Scott's part. And again, he has recanted. But no, Netanyahu is just a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Plus, just small detail there. I think February, Haaretz ran this poll, and I think 94% of Israeli society said that they weren't using enough force in Gaza.
Right.
So that already removes Netanyahu as the big bad, because it's the entirety of Israeli society. Go ahead, Alex.
No, I think also Norman Finkelstein made the really useful comment that Netanyahu is Israel today. I mean, it's smug, arrogant, murderous. And so
he's a truly representative leader.
Yeah, right. And in terms of the devolution of Israeli society, in fact, this state security family member, we have family members as well. Like in one of the former heads of the Histadrut in Israel is my cousin from Snov. His family was. This family member was saying to me that on the one hand, the Mizrahim are coming to power, right? They're displacing the Ashkenazim, and they take less bullshit, in his words. They're going to kick more ass, right? They're going to be more violent. And so, that sort of poor white mentality, or pied noir, like I am a Algerian Frenchman Jew, but Algerian, right? Like not Frenchman who came over, but an actual Algerian, but Jewish. So native to Algeria and native to the Middle East, but we're even more reactionary and violent, or more stark with it at least than the Ashkenazim, less social democratic labor. And then you've had 70 plus years now of, intermarriage. I'm no expert on Israel, never wanted to go. Even my CIA dad was very skeptical from his Bund background, but whatever. I was a founding member of Jewish Voices for Peace, but on, whatever, no expert on the issues. But anyway, so I wonder though, okay, the Mizrahim are taking over, so
you never went on Birthright?
Oh God, no.
Okay,
no.
Cool.
Yeah, so my father used to joke about the Palestinians looking more Jewish than the Jews do, or more properly Jewish, in the negotiations. He was kind of pro-Palestinian, not pro. He'd go to Norman Finkelstein talks. It was that weird. Like CIA, I think, or at least an asset. Anyway, so. What was I going to say? But, like can you remove Netanyahu is what I was trying to say, or, how many of those people can you actually remove if Israeli society really supports them?
Well, they got a color revolution going. They've got a lot of people in the streets, asking Netanyahu to go.
Growing number of people.
But yeah, I mean, can they pull it off? Because of course, Netanyahu has a power base. But it seems like a regular color revolution against Netanyahu, just like there was a color revolution against Trump with protests all around the supported by the establishment, anti-Trump protests.
Here's what I think a better question is. It's not whether they can get rid of him. Maybe they can. I don't care. But the next one, I think the favorite, the escape artist, is Benny Gantz, who's a Hungarian, by the way. Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the two guys on the ICC list, they're both Polish. But this Hungarian guy, will he be any better? Because he is under these same social pressures from the entire society. It's like, they want to get rid of Putin. And then they get Medvedev. Like, they don't think to the next day. They're incapable of having strategy, it looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know what that will achieve.
Yeah, they're declining. Yeah.
The big thing about Netanyahu is that, aside from the genocide and all that, he's not competent, because October 7th, that wasn't competence, just a battalion being overrun and brigade and division headquarters being overrun. That wasn't competent. 6 months in Gaza with a 10-1 numerical advantage on Hamas is not competent. Yeah. So I think if you just look in realist terms, the man on the street in Israel has every reason to be unhappy with him and want to. So.
Yeah, but are they rational, and will they, okay, one of the things I learned in JVP 20 years ago was the rational, more social democratic ones left 20, 30 years ago. And what you have left now are the crazies and, the messianic, crazy, violent types who want to take the whole thing down with them. I mean, look at the crazies, even blocking aid. These actively. Victims in the bombed out rubble. So,
there's still Haaretz, which they call the left. Yeah. But even those voices are increasingly saying, like, he lost this war because he didn't deliver full victory. Like, they're scorning him for not total eradication. That's what the left is scorning Netanyahu for, which I think is insane.
Speaking of crazies, I wanna shift gears a little bit, but we're still on the same topic of crazies. So Scott Ritter last night was in an epic 2.5-hour discussion with Carl Zaw and Alex somebody.
Alex from Reportify Media. I don't know his full name.
And so Scott was in very unusual form. I had never seen him engage like he was engaging with Carl Zaw and the other guy, Alex. I'm not sure how many of you guys saw it, but Scott was, I think, just trying to make a point. And the basic point was, the West is crazy, and we've got to take that into consideration, and China needs to take that into consideration. And I think Scott's overall point was he really was advocating that China and even Westerners that oppose imperialism, that we tone down our rhetoric, and China, tones down its confrontational approach and really just tries to be even more conciliatory than they've been over the past 100 years, and just continue that conciliatory positioning, because the West is crazy and they will burn it down. So to me, it's like, that's an interesting take, and Scott really is passionate about it, and you can see that in that episode. And I encourage everybody to watch his discussion with Carl Zaw from last night. Very interesting. I'm not sure I agree with it. But it's an interesting take, and the whole point is the West is crazy. Carlos.
I just wanted to say, in Scott's defense, what he was talking about is we should be afraid of nuclear war.
Yeah.
And Carl, he knows so much about the background history. I love to listen to him, but by the same token, he was pretty smug about nuclear conflict. I thought this is what a young person sounds like. And you want to go back a little bit to the ICC. I also listened to Owen Jones because I can't remember his name now. The author of this book that was detained at the airport recently. He was on the show, and Owen Jones was saying, "Oh, this decision by the ICC is epic." Yeah, Elon Pape. Thank you. Is epic. It's epic. Oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm going, well, there's 3 Hamas members and 3. It's like balanced bullshit. And I was thinking, we've had Christopher Black on this show 5 or 6 times. What would he tell that young man, Owen Jones? Shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. It's just bullshit. It's just papering over. And they fooled you. You're supposed to be an avowed leftist, and they fooled you. They lied to you. And then I said, I can't bear this. I want to hear Pape, but I can't bear this this young ninny Jones. And I went over to Larry Johnson at Napolitano. And sure enough, Larry got it right. Then I went over to Scott. Sure enough, Scott got it right. It's all bullshit. And I'm going, why
Scott gets it right most of
these
the time
people
now.
be so ignorant and easily fooled? And I had the same sense of Carl Jha. I really admire his detail. He knows his history, but sometimes he can be pretty smug and wrong because of that smugness, that kind of self-assuredness he likes to emote about what he's saying. And I could see the frustration growing in Scott Ritter when he was having the discussion, because Carl Jha made his arguments seem as though they were rational, but they weren't rational. They weren't focused enough.
They seem to be talking past each other.
Yes.
There was a lot of.
They seemed rational, but on the other hand,
that.
Scott was also worried, emotional. I mean, I've never seen Scott this. Yeah, he was rattled.
Yeah, he's very serious about the possibility of nuclear exchange.
Well, look at back in history. What was it? Probably before Nixon came to China. Mao said imperialism is a paper tiger. Right. And, when I was growing up, I could appreciate the Vietnamese and the Chinese more than I could appreciate the Russians because, it's the history, I think, with the Chinese and the Belaruskis as well. And, also the former Soviet side, that when you lose, what is it, 27 to 30 million on the Soviet side? The Chinese side was how many millions?
20.
Was it
20
million? Okay, 20 million on the Chinese side. I mean, the horrible things the Japanese imperialists did in Manchuria, the brutality.
Way earlier than Operation Barbarossa. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 1931. I mean, I was living in Japan and studying all of that. And, I knew communists in Japan and socialists and even, fascists and Yakuza in Japan. And the ultra lefts, the SRs in Japan, Chukakuha, they actually would bomb the offices of the Jiminto, the Liberal Democrats. I knew some of those guys, but it's an attitude of my other cousin Victor. He was born in Moscow, 1966, on Victory Day, right? And our country, the Soviet Union, was destroyed when he was 25 and I was 23. And he said to me 2 years ago when I visited him for the first time, he's in Finland now, he said, yeah, the Russian pundits are saying, just get it over with already. Send the missiles. Enough with the BS and the diplomacy. Because the capitalists sent the Nazis to Soviet Belarus, and they subcontracted the fascists. The end result was, in our towns, the Shtetelach, so many people were wiped away, absolutely just murdered. A town of 5,000 people, 80% was wiped out in 1 or 2 days. 10,000 peasants were murdered around the town during the course of the war. So many people murdered that we don't even know who lived there beforehand because there was no one left, to basically testify to those people's, our family's existence, right? Our friends, our neighbors' existences. So the Chinese, I'm sure, were very similar, especially in certain areas, right? So it's like the Soviet and Chinese attitude is, bring it on. It's like George W. Bush. It's like, you want to blow up the whole fucking world. You want to be crazy. Bring it on. Because there shall be no more war on our soil. You will die.
I don't blame Carl Zah for making that argument, and I don't think
neither.
it comes from immaturity. I think it comes from a
generations. My cousin said the Chinese have never forgotten, one day of humiliation that they suffered under the imperialists, and the Soviet people. The German tanks, when they come to Ukraine, the Ukrainians are like, we don't want to drive those things, because the Russians are immediately, it's like instinctual. They blow those things up, first, last, and in the middle. So, yeah.
It comes back to the disease of liberalism. And,
squaring the circle.
I'll just show you something which will even blow your mind even worse, especially given your huge family history. But I just want to say, Carl Zah didn't seem either irrational or, flippant or something like that. But I learned from both sides of that argument. It was something worth watching, and I do recommend everybody watch. So something that at the UN, I think everybody stood up and gave a minute of silence to the fallen president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, right? And this guy, who is a trained attorney in Israel, had this short 37-second presentation to respond to. I don't know if anybody's seen this before, but this was, check it out.
You so correctly. The UN Security Council dedicated a moment of silence in memory of the mass murdering president of Iran, Raisi. What a disgrace. This council, which has taken no real steps to advance the release of our hostages, bowed its head for a man responsible for massacring and murdering thousands in Iran, in Israel, and around the globe. What's next? Will the council dedicate a moment of silence to commemorate Hitler? The Security Council has become a threat to global peace and security.
Yeah, I thought the Hitler part was worth waiting for. This guy is nuts.
There's a story, if I may, when the Red Army and the NKVD, the Soviets, liberated Nyeshwiz in Western Soviet Belarus. There's a book, I forget the title, but it was written by the boy of a mother in our town, and the mother was a supporter of the right opposition. So in other words, she was a communist of sorts. And, we don't know, I don't know, no, I can't get a straight answer, how many Jews or how many people in Nyeshwiz were communists, but this family was. And they ended up, she got in a bit of trouble with the authorities because, Bukharin was out of favor by 1939, to put it mildly. And but nevertheless, she was a communist, right? Well, October 30th, 1941, the fascists march everyone to the back of the castle into the park and shoot them into a pit. That was one of two pits. And so this boy was standing beside his mother and father, and the bullets came, they missed the boy, and they murdered his mother and father, and the bodies fell on top of him, right? And he was spared. Well, I think he had to take off all his clothes, actually. So he was naked, covered in blood, laying in the pit for, hours until nightfall. And his father had good relations with the local Poles who were on the outskirts, some sort of peasant or miller or something. And they knew the local Catholic nuns. And so when it was safe to do so, he crawled out of the pit naked and bloody. And he ran to the Catholic convent. And, they saw him and, they cried and they gave him shelter, and he survived the war. He was one of the few survivors. Maybe 30 people survived out of a town of 3,000 or 4,000 people with refugees. But what happened was he then became Betar. And, you guys probably know what Betar was.
I don't.
It was that was Jabotinsky, the I guess author of the paper or book, The Iron Wall, right? That, we are the bulwark, we are admirers of the fascists, we read Mein Kampf, they were even more to the right of Irgun, right? And so but this boy's mother, his family, or his mother at least, they were communists. followers of the CPSU. And probably the majority of the town was Bund, right? The Revolutionary Jewish Socialist Workers Union. And maybe Kombund, even communist, who knows? They were all murdered. But the point is that you look at this Zionist crazy, and you know, it recalls that boy, you know, who had normal, decent parents, but they were all wiped out.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting. Your anecdotes are always explaining, you know, the underpinnings of all these various ideological movements, and not justifying them, but it's explanatory. And my point previously, I was going to relate it all back to liberalism, and that is that liberalism again doesn't appreciate the mindset of the Chinese people. It can't. It just assumes that the Chinese people are liberal, just like they're liberal. And so, that's a problem. So they don't understand that the Russians remember that 30 million people died because of the fascist invasion, and that's not going to happen again. They're not messing around, and that's why they went into Ukraine. And the West just can't understand that because they have this idiotic liberalism that they project on other people, and it's a limitation because you've got to understand the thought process and the history of Russia, of China. And Scott was kind of failing to do that. He was putting forth, no, this is what we think. And Carl's like, yeah, but this is what we think. And like, so it's you know, they're talking past each other to an extent. But
I know we've gone on for long, but I'd just like to add that this liberal method doesn't exist without the falsification of history, because these people are convinced that Normandy won World War II, and 1991 they won. And they destroyed the Soviet.
No, I heard Scott was praising the United States. We won World War II.
That's what he said. Actually honestly think that, because, you know, Andre,
we did Japan. We did Japan. No, fucking China did Japan, you stupid. Sorry.
Andre Marchanov is,
I get excited too, Scott. I don't want to call you names. But no, China defeated Japan. The communists of Russia beat the Germans. The communists of China beat the Japanese. Like you defeated the Japanese Navy. Okay. So what? But yeah, it's an embrace of a liberalized history, of a falsification of history, and then it's a falsified ideology that pretends that we really care about principles. And it's really about principles matter. They don't.
Well, the bigger problem I was going to say is historical material. I mean, if you read, who is it, Dominic Lasordo? You know, the basically liberal murder, or whatever, you know, the title of the book was. You know, you go back to English liberalism, it committed genocide against the Irish, quite consciously.
And then around the world,
And around the world. You know, Bengal, you know, the Vietnamese dying in, well, you know, that was fascism, or, you know, but more so. But, you know, I just say my conclusion after decades of BS, and then, but going back to post-Soviet Belarus, interrogating people there, and you know, searching on Google, et cetera, you know, putting the pieces together as best I could. Basically, it was the liberals of the day, the right-wing social democrats, right, who you know, repressed the left-wing social democrats, Luxemburg and Liebknecht. And in fact, that was the message of the comrades in my town. The main street of the Geta was renamed no longer Mikhailovna Street, or whatever it was, the Polish Pani name. They renamed it to Wulica Liebknecht, you know, Street of Liebknecht. And you know, if these traitors in the West, these filthy right-wing social democrats, and now today these liberals that they've devolved into, right? These brainless idiots, as Medvedev points out, you know, these liberal zombies, technocrats, they were the ones who sent the Nazis. And again, they're repeating today. You know, history is repeating now, rhyming with the attack on Russia again through the Ukrainian proxies, the Ukrainian traitors. But it's material. You know, these people are petty bourgeois in alliance with the bourgeoisie of their own countries, as Liebknecht and Lenin pointed out in 1914, continuing through to 1919, continuing through to 1941 to 1991 to 2014, 2022, I guess, the counterattack. So it is a historical continuity there of 100 plus years, and it is grounded in historical material reality of not only an ideological political current of liberalism, which used to be social democracy, right, the fake compromise, but it's grounded in the petty bourgeoisie, not only of the West, but of all lands. The difference is historically that the petty bourgeoisie in the East allied itself with the proletariat and the peasantry, and they were militants, they were revolutionary. So even my grandparents, who are Mensheviks, they were like Black Panthers. They were for revolutionary violence against their oppressors. And, they were, in the end, they were murdered by the Western petty bourgeoisie. But the Eastern petty bourgeoisie, at least then and even now, resist that. The worst movements, the liberalism, I guess, of the Western petty bourgeoisie. So I guess that's, for me, is the future question is, my hope is the working class of China, I guess, will inspire in future the Russian working class or the Indian working class, the African working class, et cetera, and peasantry, to build a better, world. So beyond liberalism. So, yeah.
We've got to move beyond liberalism. I mean, liberalism is synonymous with barbarism and the rule of the wealthy elites, of buying for their own interests. And we got to look at humanity's interests. We got to look at all the challenges facing the entire planet and cooperate to solve them instead of just looking out for the bottom line of these rich motherfuckers. Thank you guys so much for a long show. We were an hour and 40 minutes. That's great. We did get off to a late start. I'm sure we all have low blood sugars and full bladders. I know I do. Anybody got any last words? I mean,
yeah, I disagree with you and Ben's character, Billy Bob and Ben's characterization of that conversation.
Of course you do. That's what we do.
I absolutely disagree. If Scott Ritter had mentioned Herman Kahn on thermonuclear war or any of those other fuckers, I think Ja might have been schooled a little better. But I think he was really disingenuous in his notion that
you're right. We disagree, but that's not worth a whole other conversation. I think
your team, Scott, in that discussion, you take Scott's side pretty much.
Yeah,
I learn from both.
Of course I do.
I don't do
I'm
teams.
afraid, I'm an old man. I really don't give a shit if you all get blown up in a nuclear war. I've had my time. It's been great. And I fought for it, and it's been great. Mm-hmm. You young guys, fuck you. If you want to go with Za and that kind of crap, go ahead and go with it. I don't give a shit. Go with it.
Take care, everybody.
If you die in a nuclear exchange, don't come running to my grave. Okay?
Hey, Dust is not on your side this time, Carlo. Oh. He says Scott has no right to tell China what to do. Scott is asking China to continue to be magnanimous and to not be confrontational. That's what Scott's telling China, because he's telling China to do that because the U.S. is crazy. And I don't know. I mean, I get what Scott's trying to say, but China is going to do what China's going to do, and I'm not going to tell China to tone it down. But
I didn't hear that.
I think we should.
From Ja. Is Ja taught China?
I think we should.
China.
Look, Ja also said, I believe the American leadership is crazy. They agreed on every point. They didn't agree on what China should do. But I don't think that's worth anything at this point. I'm really glad I met Alex, and I've picked up on many things. But one thing I've learned is your family is huge. And thank you again for coming on the show. But perhaps those bladders,
Yeah,
guys. Thank you so much for all the viewers in the comments. I like it when the comments start having their own little arguments. That's great. We appreciate and promote dialogue. diverse opinions, and so that's what we're about as we watch the Empire Decline. So we'll see you on Friday. We'll be back on Friday. Thank you.